Hi, this is Morten Jensen from the NBA Show, and today we'll be discussing Andre Drummond and why he's not really that attractive of a trade piece. Stay tuned. Andre Drummond is one of the most polarizing players we've had over the past 10 years in the NBA for one reason. He's productive, yet his value isn't really reflective in that way because he's not one of those guys who consistently gives himself to the basketball court. And you may wonder, what does that mean? The guy is averaging like a bazillion rebounds. How does that figure that he doesn't give himself on the court? And it's really complicated to say. There is this fact that Drummond, when he's motivated, can be one of the most influential centers in today's game, but when he's not, he's also in the polar opposite camp of being one of the least influential or most negatively influential players in the league. And that lack of leadership, that lack of determination, that is problematic. And so when you look at his stat sheet and you go, well, this guy's averaging 17.5 points and 13.5 boards for the Cleveland Cavaliers this season, that's objectively attractive, no? No. Well, yes, the stats are definitely intriguing. I'm not going to say otherwise, but him as a trade chip, not really. And I have something to prove that with, because last year, just over a calendar year ago, last February, he got traded from the Detroit Pistons to the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the price for Andre Drummond, who at the time had, statistically speaking, a hell of a season, John Henson, Brandon Knight, and a second-round draft pick. Neither guy plays in the league anymore, and a second-rounder as well. A second-rounder for Andre Drummond, a former All-Star, someone who routinely grabs 15 to 16 boards at night. This is where we are with Drummond. There's really not that attractive a market, and yesterday Shams Charania of The Athletic came out and basically said he is being shopped, and in particular the Toronto Raptors are interested. I don't really see why they would be. I don't really see a package going here, but more importantly, Drummond is not going to be playing for the Cleveland Cavaliers ever again, probably, because he's going to be sit down until he's being traded, which makes sense because you don't want necessarily to have your guy be injured while he's being shopped around. The thing is, Shams also noted something interesting in his article. He mentioned teams, including Dallas, were looking at Drummond as a buyout candidate. Now, let's just take that aside. A buyout is not a trade. That means he's bought out of his remaining, I think it's $28.7 million, where the Cavaliers or whatever team trades for him and then buys him out. I don't think that's going to materialize. I think he'll be bought out by the Cleveland Cavaliers. You know, you find out a certain number that you're comfortable with paying to basically have Drummond go away, and then he'll get picked up by someone else on a minimum contract deal. That's where Dallas is. They're not ready to actually trade for him. They're willing to sign him if he becomes available for a very, very modest amount of money because that's where he is. And let's be honest, this isn't the first center who's put up great numbers but who just cannot get it together and make himself a valuable piece of an NBA team. Hassan Whiteside has been notorious as another center who is an elite rebounder, someone who consistently is in the top of the league in rebounds per game and also blocks per game. He even scores at a high rate, yet he's backing up Richaun Holmes on the Sacramento Kings right now. There is just not an attractive market for Hassan Whiteside despite these statistical accomplishments. This same thing is going for Drummond as well, and it's because they just don't buy in. Another example as well, before he started realizing his proper role, was Dwight Howard. Dwight was living off his past fame, and he was basically insisting that he'd be a focal point in some capacity. It wasn't until realism started hitting home and he got bounced around the league virtually every single year that he realized, okay, I need to change something up. The Lakers were basically the last resort. They signed him, he came off the bench, and he just played to his strengths. He didn't add any of the drama. He didn't require shots. He didn't demand certain touches. He didn't demand an X amount of minutes. He just accepted his role for what it was, being a defender and grabbing rebounds and, well, scoring off of putbacks, because that's never a bad thing. If Andre Drummond and Hassan Whiteside took that similar approach as Dwight did, they would be looked at in a more positive light for all NBA teams. But they're really not, and it's because they think they have so much more to offer, which theoretically they do, but it's not something that helps teams, because when Andre Drummond in particular gets the ball near the post, he spends a lot of time just milking that clock before he actually goes up for a shot, which has proven very inefficient. It's easy to stop, the ball stops moving, the perimeter guys are just standing around. It's not a high efficiency basketball play anymore. It would be something else if he shot like 85% around the rim, but he doesn't. He is still a guy who will get wild offensively and take shots outside of the flow of the offense, and it just doesn't make sense. That's why when you look at Drummond right now, both contractually and trade value wise, it's not going to look pretty when he hits the free agency market here in 2021, because if you don't even want to pay more than a second rounder for him on the trade market, Lord knows you're probably not wanting to pay him $20 million a year either. Hassan Whiteside is now living with that consequence, and he signed a very modest contract with the Sacramento Kings as well. And this is the new reality that we're living in for centers who actually produce a whole lot, but who aren't really inclined to play to a team's strengths. Basically, the NBA has changed, not just in terms of playing style, but also who they look at from a personality perspective. Having an adaptive personality, an adaptive playing style, somewhere where you're willing to say, you know what, I know this team needs X, so I'm going to provide that, even though I'm typically known for doing C. That's what you need now. You need to have that flexibility. You need to have that change of mindset. You need to be able to actually read a situation and go, I may not be the right guy for this right now, so let me transform myself into someone else who can actually fulfill this specific need that a club has. And so far, Andre Drummond has proven to not be that. Granted, he's only 27. There's time. I'm not off the Andre Drummond train yet. If there's a guy out there who could turn into something useful just because of how raw talented he is, it's Drummond, right? I mean, we're talking about a guy who could possibly, I'm going to say something that sounds nuts, but listen to it. This is a guy who theoretically could have a season where he averages 20 and 20. In modern day NBA, that's unheard of. But if there's a guy out there who could do that, it's him. That means that there is a certain talent level, because 20 and 20, that's not something you just walk into. But if you have to pick between getting that type of production and getting someone who only cares half the time and doesn't really adapt to your plays, then you're always going to pivot away from that and go to whatever works, which is why the Cleveland Cavaliers are focusing on Jarrett Allen moving forward as their primary center, and they are going to be re-signing him this summer or fall or whenever off-season starts. And that really begs the question for me in terms of Drummond. If we go back to him and make that full circle here, what is the future for him? Is it getting bought out and join a contender and then becoming the new Dwight Howard already before he hits 30? Maybe. I hope I'm wrong that that's the case. I actually want to be wrong about that. What's important here for Andre Drummond moving forward is, like I said, adaptability, but also building his personality a little bit. NBA teams are loaded with guys with huge egos who have a lot to prove and who have a lot of talent, and they want to showcase it. And Drummond is really no exception. There's a reason he wants all the touches. There's a reason he wants to be highly ingrained in both offense and defense, and that is because he is tremendously talented. We cannot get around that fact. That same thing is true of Dwight Howard, actually, still at this age. He's going to be 36 this year, and that's still relevant. Hassan Whiteside as well. These are talented players, but they have to understand that their roles in the modern day NBA have changed. And for Drummond, there's a lot of time to still pivot into becoming a highly influential and sustainable center who starts, plays big minutes, and does what he's good at, really, rebounding, defending, and scoring near the hoop, because he can do those things. He can be a guy who cleans up the glass offensively and just goes for putbacks. You don't want the post-ups, you don't want the mid-range shots. You might want a little bit of the elbow passing, because he's actually pretty good at that. That's one thing we really have never given him enough credit for, and that's something that I think you should be utilized just a little bit more as. But that's down the line. It starts and ends with Drummond. There's just no way around that. It starts with him understanding what is required of him to survive in the NBA climate. And then it's about a team understanding how to motivate him accurately, while also fulfilling his needs, not just contractually, but also on the court. Drummond undoubtedly would want a big payday, which he's not going to get this year, unless some team decides we're all in on Drummond. We didn't want to trade for him because we didn't want to give up assets, but we want to sign him, which could be a thing, but then the same problem is going to arise a couple years from now. All logic, though, dictates that he's not going to break the bank this summer. Which, okay, if that's what he wants to do, then he needs to play ball, both literally and figuratively, because he needs to make sure that the team that has him is getting the right version of him. That can be applied to Whiteside as well. And for Drummond, it doesn't really start with him just going to a team that's going to say, you know what, do you. No. It starts with going to a team that understands structure, understands discipline, understands communication, understands boundaries. It seemed like Boston, and Lord knows that Boston does not want Drummond, or at least according to their fans. I have no insights into what Danny Ainge wants. But technically, he could actually be interesting for Boston because they have that infrastructure. Brad Stevens would get much more out of Andre Drummond than virtually anyone else, because he speaks well to players. He understands where they're coming from. He understands the skill level. He understands the talent. Now, would Drummond's career just be altered automatically by going to Boston and playing under Stevens? No, he has to want it himself. It's a two-way street. But this is where we are right now. Andre Drummond, a guy who's averaging 17.5 points and 13.5 rebounds per game, is persona non grata, technically, in the NBA. And you can argue there's something wrong with the NBA if someone of that talent level is not really attractive. But I would say this is the NBA evolving into something more. This is the NBA evolving into the kind of league that looks at players and takes personality and motivation and buy-in to a much higher degree than they did before. And you can never say that's a bad thing, because you always want guys to step their best foot forward and actually give a damn about team success and try to make it far in the playoffs. Drummond, for all his talents, has never been that guy. So maybe, given the climate right now, he needs to be.